Welcome to the Kids with Big Emotions podcast, formerly known as Calm Nights, Strong Days. I am your host, Andy Clark. We are going to be diving into episode 73 of how to support your frustration as a parent with your distracted child. Now, as you can see, we are flipping the switch a little bit because normally I'm talking about the frustrations with with our kids. I'm talking about their outbursts, them kind of losing their crap, the anxiety and stuff that they have. And in this one, I'm going to be talking a little bit about, as parents, when our shark brain or our turtle comes out, where we are, oh man, just wanting to bite our kids' heads off, or just yell at, scream at them, or we really are. Let's be honest. I mean, we do. Nobody's perfect. Or we just kind of go find them and go into our little shell, like our turtle, pull everything in, and are just like, okay, do what you're going to do. I'm going to just act like nothing's even happening because I don't even know what to do at this point. Right. And that's what often happens with our distracted kids when we're asking them to help with things, when they're trying to pack a bag and can't pack it, when they don't hand in their homework again because they're distracted, when they do start doing something for you, but you realize the task didn't get done because they got into something else. They squirrel brained. Some of these are traits of ADHD, but some of these aren't. They're really when these kids just get distracted. They get into other things. They may be able to be so focused on things that they want to be focused on. But then it gets to where it's something that they're not really interested in and they just don't want to do it. And they just start getting distracted by anything and everything around them. And so what I thought would be helpful today is to kind of go through why this is happening. Well, I can't tell you exactly why because every child is different. What I can tell you are some things that could be happening in their brains, some skills that they may be lacking that we're not even aware are skills that we need to, well, I didn't know this. So I'm going to go on the assumption that there's been a point, maybe you know it now, but there's been a point where maybe you didn't know that there's certain functions, or that's not the word, certain skills that we actually have to learn and we're not just born with. It's as I'm saying this, I'm actually going back to where I think of where people say common sense isn't that common. And that used to baffle me. Like, how can people not have common sense? But the more that I have dove into executive functioning, the more I'm seeing, that's because they have executive functioning skill struggles. That's because their executive functioning skills, the manager of their brain, the one that is supposed to make sure that everything is doing what it needs to do when it needs to do it, that's managing their time sense, that's managing their planning skills, that's managing their inhibition, that's managing their attention, their focus, their perception, that's managing their decision making, all of these things, isn't doing a great job. And so this common sense thing just doesn't become so common. So things that we just expect that people should know, when they don't, at times, I'm learning now it could be. And I want to say could be because it's fascinating as well. I was listening to Tara Sumner, who is my executive functioning coach. She is the guru who I'm learning from. She's phenomenal. And she was saying that when you have a hammer, you think everything's a nail. You pound everything in. It's like, it's a nail, we're good. And so she said she does have to be careful sometimes. Like, she's an SLP, speech and language pathologist, that dives deep into executive functioning because she learned that, first off, as an SLP, anytime somebody coming to her with reading or writing or speech struggles, any language struggles at all, that instantly it's a functional issue from the speech language sections of their brain. And you can keep hammering and hammering and hammering that nail, she says, but that's where she figured out very early on into her career that some kids that can't read, it's actually because of their attention, or it's because of a nonverbal working memory struggle, or a verbal working memory struggle, or all these different pieces that our managers manage. And once she gets those in, sometimes the reading and writing is, the issues aren't there anymore. Sometimes they still are, which is where she dives into them, the SLP modality. So she has like a hammer for executive functioning and a hammer for SLP. But she says, I still have to be cautious too, because when someone's coming to me, like, I have to start thinking sometimes, well, maybe this is they're unable to do these things because of their sleep being so bad. They're exhausted, or their stress is at an inhumane level, or, and in my mind, I'm thinking, yes, because that is why I got into what I do, where there's so many pieces of the puzzle that I started off as, well, I actually started off personal training and nutrition coaching. And then when I hit burnout, no matter how much I monitored and adjusted and whatever my workouts and exercise and adjusted my nutrition, I could not get out of burnout. And then I started realizing that gut plays a part and hormones play a part. And I started studying and learning them. And what's above my scope of practice, I always have referrals for other practitioners on that. And I started then diving into being a sleep and stress coach, and realizing, like, when someone's sleep is off too, there's so many reasons that could be. When we have stress, is it traumas? Is it social? Is it environmental? Is it physical? Is it nutritional? Is it mental? Like, where are all these, like, the stresses are phenomenal, that you can't have one hammer putting in all of these nails. So sorry, I just went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But that's the thing. Where did I even start on this? Man, I'm going into squirrel brain right now. But with all of this is that, oh, I know, is I'm saying I can't actually tell you exactly why your kid is distracted. But what I am going to do is explain some things to you from a few different lenses. I'm going to explain it from an executive functioning piece lens, and some other pieces in there. And you might be able to see that there may be some of the pieces for your child. And my hope in that is it will take some of the frustration off you, because if you start seeing and understanding that your child may not be at all able to control yet the distractions, that they're constantly in squirrel brain, ADHD all over the place, attention everywhere, except for where it's supposed to be. Not getting things done, forgetting really important things that you're asking them to do, not handing in their homework, not able to like get started on tasks, that we can take some of that frustration out today, because you can start to understand some of it. Okay. So that is definitely my hope with today. So let's delve into this. So squirrel brain, when we are thinking ADHD, we're thinking, oh, this child doesn't pay attention enough. This child doesn't focus enough. We need to get them to focus more. We need to get them to focus better and longer. And that is the opposite. So I'd like you to just sit here. I'm going to do an exercise with you right now. So let me get my timer out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to time you for a minute. And in that minute, I want you to think of nothing else at all. I'm getting my timer. I want you to think of absolutely nothing else except for breathing. I want you to just sit here and think about breathing in and out. If you're driving, definitely think about the road. But if you're not driving and you can just sit here right now, we're going to just for 1 minute. That's it. 1 minute. Think about breathing in and out. I want you to just think about the inhale and exhale. All right, let's do it right now. Ready? Let's start now. So only focusing on the inhale, breathing in, and the exhale, breathing out. That's all you're focusing on for a minute. 2, 1, and you are done. All right. So I am going to make a bet right now that none of you that are listening to this solely were able to focus on the inhale and exhale. I'm going to make a guess, a very educated guess, that what happened is your mind went on to something else and you brought it back. You're like, nope, need to be focusing on the inhale and exhale. I'm going to bring it back. And then your mind went to something else and you brought it back. And you did this multiple times through that minute. So when we're looking at kids that are struggling to focus on something, we could often say they need to stay focused on that on that task and they need to learn how to sustain their focus. But what it is they actually need to learn a skill they probably do not have. It's an executive functioning skill about refocusing. So it's teaching them how to refocus. So when we're reading a book, when we're listening to a book, when you're listening to this podcast, your thought is going all over the place, but you keep bringing it back to my voice. You keep bringing it back to what I'm speaking about. And there might be times you're like, oops, lost my focus. And you rewind a little bit to get it back again, right? Because you caught yourself in time, or you caught yourself not in time, but after you didn't catch what I had said. And you're like, oh, I need to go back and hear that. And you'll go back and you'll listen, right? So it's about really being able to refocus. And so I'd like you to really think too, in another way, we're going to give it another visual of flashlights versus floodlights. Now there is, oh shoot, I wish I had her name. I think her last name is Jha. If I actually Google it, from executive functioning, I'm just checking because I don't want to do her disjustice. I'll just put it in the I'll put it in the notes. But she did write a book on having a flashlight versus floodlights. And flashlight versus floodlights is where when a baby's born, everything that they see is in floodlights. They are taking in so much information. And it can be quite overwhelming, but that's how they're taking in so much. But eventually you'll see their eyes eventually like lock onto one thing. That's when they're in a flashlight. And when they're in that flashlight, oh, it's Amisha Jha, Amisha Gha, Amisha Jha, and it's peak mind, find your focus, own your intention. So that is, I'm putting that into my show notes so that I remember to put that in for you guys. Okay. So when we're looking at something through a flashlight, that's where our focus is supposed to be. So with these kids, they keep shining their flashlight everywhere else and not bringing it back to where they are. So with a kid that is, their attention just keeps going all over the place, they may be, you're in the middle of a conversation and they start talking about something completely different that has nothing to do with the topic you're talking about, all kinds of things. They're just all over the place. That is attention. And that's where we need to keep bringing that flashlight back into where we need it to focus, right? And that is a skill that we need to teach these kids that are struggling with that executive functioning piece. And it can be so frustrating for a parent when you're like, can you just focus more? Can you? And instead it's refocus. So you can start teaching your child about a flashlight, and you can use that cue with your child as well. It's like, where's your flashlight supposed to be focusing now? And they're like, oh yeah, boom. And they'll get back to where they need to be if you're both coming at this from a calm way. And when I'm working with somebody, I actually want them to keep getting distracted so we can keep practicing on getting them to focus. So if it's a child that is into, like, so you might have a kid, I remember speaking with a mom about this recently, where their child, when they were younger, read a lot, but once they got into chapter books, they stopped reading. And I'm like, and they have an ADHD diagnosis. I'm like, how's their refocusing? And she's like, oh, sit beside her and while she's reading, she keeps coming to me with like all of these conversations about everything that has nothing to do with the book. So I taught her about the flashlight. And I teach her about the flashlight. And when she comes and gives you that, she starts talking about something. What you can do is you can teach them to have a notebook if they're old enough, or you can say, let me write down that thought for you. And we'll talk about it later. Where should your flashlight be now? And like, oh yeah. And you put the flashlight back, and then they can start reading. So your goal with the kid, maybe with ADHD, on reading might be to read a page. And in that one page, depending on the severity of their ADHD, or 1 minute or 2 minutes of reading with them, they may lose their focus 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 times, depends on the child, right? And your goal is to, where should your flashlight be shining? Where should your flashlight be shining? And asking them. So it's helping teach them these skills. So when you see a child that is really, really, really struggling with this attention, instead of getting frustrated, we can start taking a step back and go, wow, I'm really noticing how my child really does not have the ability to refocus. That must be so tough in their day. Could you imagine how much effort it takes somebody who does not have a natural ability to refocus to continually focus in their day? Their bandwidth, their exhaustion from that is like incredible, which, as we know, when our bandwidth, when our exhaustion, when we're using so much of our energy on those basic things in our day, we become shorter. We become more frustrated. We become less focused even. We're not like our abilities to even do what we were doing by the end of the day are worse than the start. I have, before I learned about this, I have spoke with some parents that did their kids reading tutorial stuff in the morning. And they said, because the kid can't do it in the afternoon. And that tells me right away, it's not a reading struggle. It's a focusing struggle, a refocusing and attention struggle, possibly also with inhibition and planning, or different parts of the executive functioning world that I'm going to be diving into with you next. So yeah, let's get into inhibition here. Inhibition is where you can't stop something. So you may have a child that's always touching somebody's things, that's always touching other people. You may have a child that is always saying things to people without thinking about their thoughts first, right? You may have a child that hits people and was like, I didn't even know it was coming. It just happened, right? They know the consequence. They don't want to hit somebody. Like, they don't want to hurt them. That if you're sitting there and you talk to them about like the consequences of that. So a child too that isn't paying attention in class, they know the consequences of what's going to happen, but they can't stop themselves in order to, like, maybe they're the jokester in class. That is one thing with ADHD kids too, is they can sometimes become the jokester in the class. Because they can't pay attention, but they can be funny and make people laugh. So some kids, there's actually a famous, some famous comedians, actually a couple of them, that definitely like have ADHD and honed those skills because they were skills that were able to help them socially to kind of buffer the social awkwardness of not being able to pay attention, and that they can crack a joke if they didn't hear something. So you get this inhibition where these kids do know the consequences. Usually, not all the time. There are some kids that say things and blurt things out, but it's because they actually don't have the perception executive functioning skill, where their perception and understanding if what they're going to say is actually going to hurt somebody. If they're saying, well, I'm better than that one than you, or you're not good at this, and they're saying it because it's actually true facts, because they might be like a crazy smart kid and they may know more than the person about that, but your friends don't want to hear that. So that might be a perception struggle instead of an inhibition struggle at times as well. Just where, yeah, we say things and we're like, oh, why did I say that? That's often inhibition, because we know that there is a consequence to these things. And these kids can explain the consequence, the outcome if they don't do it. They know this. They're good kids. They often don't want the consequence. What is happening is they don't have the inability to stop doing something. So they might look distracted, but it's they can't stop getting into other things. They can't stop touching other things. They can't stop, you know, getting into something else other than what they are into right now, like touching everything, staying on tasks. Video games, this is a big one too. They can't get off video games. Video games and devices are super executive functioning taxing, if that makes sense. They use a lot of your executive functioning skills to be able to manage your time, to be able to stay focused, to be able to not go down a whole squirrel pathway. So if you're already struggling with that, oh man, being on devices, getting into those things like can put you down a rabbit hole, or it can have you stuck on a video game for so long where you cannot get off of it. You know your homework needs to get done. You know you have a project due and you can't get off of your device. And that can often be because of somebody that is struggling with the inhibition skills, the abilities to stop something even when they know the consequences. So it's not that these kids are bad, it's that they are often struggling with some of these executive functioning skills, these management skills in their brain that take so much power. Now, the third one that I did want to speak of, and as I'm saying, there's so many different executive functioning pieces that can go into this and pieces outside of it, that I'm only covering 3 of them today. The other one is planning. The amount of executive functioning that is required for planning is unbelievable. You need to think in advance of every single step that is going to be required. You need to be able to visualize it. You need to be able to implement it. Stay on task. Keep your focus in there. You need to keep your inhibition from doing other things. Like, it is so hard to follow a plan. And I'm talking about a plan of doing the dishes. I'm talking about a plan of doing your homework. I'm talking about a plan of getting a bag packed to go out of the house, right? These can all be simple plans. Getting yourself ready to get out the door in the morning. Those are plans. But when your other executive functioning skills are struggling, when you're unable to really see the future very well. And by see the future, I mean, if you're packing a bag for school, seeing the future of what you need at school, which you may go to school every single day. And as a parent, you're sitting there going, yeah, but they were there yesterday and the day before, but they may not have the observation skills, the perception skills. They may not have the nonverbal working memory skill where they are able to take all of the things that are visually in their class and imprint like the visual pieces in their brain so they can pull them up and think and be able to see them so they know what they need on a daily basis, right? That nonverbal working memory is like a big foundational piece to executive functioning. And it's, if somebody is weak in their executive functioning skills, they really struggle to see the future. They really struggle to evaluate the past. So struggling to evaluate what they did right, what they did wrong, what they should continue to do, what they need to adapt and change in a plan. So if a child's continually struggling to pack their bag every morning, you're like, but it's the same stuff you put in your bag every day. They may struggle with the hindsight piece of the verbal working memory piece, where they struggle to remember what they need to have in it every single day. They struggle with the visualizing of what was in the bag yesterday and being able to put it in again, or visualizing and remembering everything that they did the other day. They may be able to remember it, but they may not have the visual piece, which they need to pull out in remembering what to put back in that bag again. Like, there's so many different pieces. A child may be so strong in the verbal, but may bomb tests if they're not able to actually visualize concepts and pull those concepts out with the nonverbal working memory. So there's just so many pieces to this puzzle, but when your child is getting distracted a lot, there's usually some executive functioning pieces, but again, I don't want to keep that hammer and saying it's only executive functioning. That's when we also want to be looking at other things. How stressed is their body? So it could be stress from executive functioning, could be stress from other things. With my son, that was like before I ever drove into executive functioning, I was diving into all of his outbursts and everything with his stress system. And we made quite a lot of headway until I was missing that one piece, which was the executive functioning. But we dove into like environmental toxins, we dove into nutrition, into his sleep, into his gut, into his hormones, his digestion, into breathing, nervous system regulation, like all of these different things. So there's so many different pieces too. When somebody's getting distracted, it could be that they are just so exhausted, so tired, the stress system just can't tackle things because of so many other things in their day, right? Like, it's just fascinating the amount of stressors that we do have nowadays and in our environment. And it really is sitting and figuring out the pieces of that puzzle, which is what I love doing. I love that part where I really get to sit down with parents and dive deep into all of these questions, asking parents for so many observations in their house and their home of behaviors and when behaviors happen. And, you know, if teachers are open to it, helping me fill out a questionnaire too for the executive functioning, but also the stressors of this child. If they notice certain behaviors before certain activities or doing certain things or going certain rooms or before or after meals, right? A stressor could just be that they're hungry, right? Like, it really is understanding all of these pieces. And I love diving into all of these pieces and putting them all together. My hope from today is that before, when your child is distracted, that you stop and you give yourself a moment to reflect and go, wow, how much energy are they putting into attention, or are they able to refocus? How much energy does it take for them to refocus? How much energy have they used today just to refocus on things? Like, maybe you gave them 3 steps of something to do and they can only handle 1. What if you were able to decrease that for them today? Like, you stop and you think, did I just give them too many steps? And this is the thing too with homework, is with some of our kids with these really taxed stress systems, where their executive functioning may be like just working so much during the day, for them to come home and execute homework might be so many steps that they can't manage it, that if you can break that down for them to where that's like, okay, just do this one step. Let's do this one step and we'll work on that. They may be able to do that. They may not be able to do 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. And that's just a lot for them, right? It becomes a lot. So stop and take a look. Is my child distracted? Are they not doing what I've asked them to do? Why? Why is it? Is it their attention? Is it their inhibition, their ability to not stop doing something else? Is it their planning? When did they last eat? Are they really, really hungry? How is their sleep been? Are they recovered? Have they been very active in sports and activities, or very active in something mentally? Like, do they have the capacity right now to do what I've been asking them to do? And they may not. That part of their brain really does solidify itself in its mid-20s, 21, 25 years old. So it could just be too that their brain has not developed enough to that point, solidified itself with all of those functions, that we may be asking too much of them too soon. So before we kick into our shark brain, before we kick into our turtle brain, just stop and ask yourself, while you're in your dolphin brain, while you're able to really big picture think, look at this calmly, look at this objectively, stop and think, about where your child truly is. Like, I don't believe that any child is a bad child. All of their behaviors are for a reason. And it really is, if we take the time to sit down and figure out the reason why the behavior is happening, the child is going to want to do better and fix it. They're going to want to work on it. Not when they're in their shark brain, they definitely won't. But when they're into their dolphin brain again, when you can implement strategies to get them there, they want to do better. Now, I also want you to understand this can take time. It can take years and years. And when we're looking at like autism and stuff, it's possible that they may not be ready, or sorry, that's not the right statement. It's possible that there is a ceiling as to where their executive functioning skills can get to, but you can always work on some of those skills with them, and you can always get them to a certain point, and you can help one another to start understanding more of that, depending on, how far on the spectrum they are and what their abilities are. There are still ways to be able to help and nurture and guide them to strengthen some of their executive functioning skills. And with some autism, like, you can make really big headway. Just depends on where they lie on the spectrum. It's such a large spectrum. So take that moment. When you start feeling that shark brain, you start feeling that turtle brain kicking in, take a moment and breathe. Take that breath and ask yourself if your child is doing the best that they can right now. And how can you support them to be able to do a little bit better right now? What can you do right now to support them instead of getting angry and frustrated with them? I'll leave that with you here today. Just know that if you would like to be around other parents like you can join our Facebook group. The link is in the show notes. You can also hop on a 30-minute call with me. Hop on a call and ask me all your questions. I'm always curious to find out what questions you do have, so that I can definitely make sure that this podcast is speaking to you. And yeah, I'd love to hop on that call, love to get to know you and your child a little bit more and answer as many questions as I can. Those links are in the show notes, and I will see you in the next episode.